Hello, my name is Phoebe Stein, and I am the president of the Federation of State Humanities Councils. Thank you so much for joining us today or this evening or whatever time zone you are in. Thank you so much for joining us. I know we have a great group here. We are going to have a conversation about a book called Human Work, and I want to introduce Jamie Merisotis. I want to say that right, Merisotis. Who is the author of the book and also is a globally recognized leader in philanthropy, education, and public policy. And since 2008 has been the CEO of the Lumina Foundation. So welcome, Jamie, and thank you so much for being here. And the Federation's connection to this event, I also want to introduce Margarita Benítez, who is the Executive Director of the Puerto Rican Endowment for the Humanities, one of our 56 state and jurisdictional humanities councils who brought this project and Jamie's work to the Federation's attention, and just delighted to have everyone here today. I do want to say, as we continue on in the hour, please do put your questions in that Q&A box. So just type your questions into the Q&A box. Now I actually want to cue for a video to give you just a brief video to give you some context or some more information and context, right? The humanities is all about context for this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. So right after the video ends, Margarita, I'll invite you to begin your Q&A.
This book is about how work is changing and how we as humans are going to need to change as smart machines do more. Human work is the work that only humans can do. We think critically, we solve problems, we behave ethically. These are the kinds of things that make us humans. This book is about how the world is going to change, how we as humans are going to need to change both as individuals and as a society as a result of the changing nature of human work. The reality is we have no idea what the jobs of the future will be like. Some studies say we'll create jobs, some say we'll lose jobs. What's most important is that the tasks associated with work will change. That's what we need to focus on. We need to focus on the fact that as humans, we need to do the things that only humans can do as workers. So the future is going to change. We need to pay attention to how it's changing, but it's not going to be whether or not we are losing jobs or creating jobs. It's about how work itself is changing in new and different ways. Everyone will need to change in this new world of human work. Employers, educators, philanthropy, and of course the workers themselves, they'll all need to change. As employers, we'll need to focus on the fact that the nature of who our workers are is changing and the diversity of our workforce is changing. So how we prepare people for human work will be different. As educators, we'll need to focus on the fact that as society is changing and as the needs of work are changing, learning and work are going to become more integrated. We'll need to focus on the fact that our job as educators is to prepare people for that human work. And as workers, of course, workers will need to change because they will need to focus on how their skills, their knowledge, and their abilities are going to need to evolve as machines do more and more of the tasks that humans do. We've lived our lives believing that there's a learning phase early in your life and a working phase that comes later. But the reality is we are all learner workers. In today's system, learning and working have become one ecosystem. That's because the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you need to perform to be successful in work and in life are things that have to be addressed over and over again over the course of your working lifetime. So there is no learning phase, no earning phase. These are the same phases working together over the course of your entire lifetime. That's what human work is about. It is about learning and earning and then bringing together this capacity to serve others that makes us these learner workers that are successful in work and in life. COVID-19 has been a great accelerator. It's actually accelerated the patterns that we've seen as a result of environmental change, political change, economic change. It's accelerated those factors. So today, for example, we know that African Americans die at twice the rate of whites when it comes to COVID-19. That's an acceleration of a pattern that we've long known about racial disparity and racial injustice. We need to prepare people for human work because we need to prepare their human traits. We need to help them build their capacity to deal with these threats, to deal with these crises. That's what human work is all about. It's about actually building our compassion and our empathy and our ability to be ethical and to serve others. That's why responding to these challenges is so important, and that's what COVID-19 has actually shown us. It has shown us that we're actually accelerating the trends that have long been in place in American society. One of the people whose stories I tell in the book is Marcia McCallum, somebody who worked for 30 years to support her family as a waitress, getting her family through the day, trying to help them be successful. And then after 3 decades, she decided to build her own human skills and traits. First, she trained as a nurse, got an associate degree, and eventually she ended up working in the biotech field, building cell cultures so that you can have better information to help solve cancer. So this is an example of someone who built on their own ability to interact with people, to associate with others as a result of her work as a waitress, and now she's building her ability to solve society's problems by educating herself and actually making a difference in society. Democracy is ultimately about collective well-being, and the opposite of democracy is authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is about conformity. It's about aligning with one person or one group's ideas and values and perspective. In a democratic system, we actually have to prepare people for their civic well-being, for democracy. That means that they need to learn how to serve others, that they need to actually develop those capacities. We know from surveys that people with college degrees, for example, vote more, they volunteer more, they serve others in their community. So we need to prepare people for human work by building their democratic skills and abilities. That's why human work is so important. It's because it allows us to serve others and to make sure that we behave in a democratic way, in ways that actually serve collective well-being, not just the well-being of one or the few. You know, in the midst of a pandemic and unimaginable racial injustice, I am optimistic. I'm optimistic because I believe that we are going to turn the corner on our ability to prepare people for human work, the work that only humans can do. We are showing a tremendous amount of compassion and empathy at these moments of great societal challenge. We are demonstrating our ability to come together to solve problems. So even in the face of all of these headwinds, I believe we can solve the problems of the future, but we must prepare people for human work. We must prepare them for the work that only humans can do in this era where machines are performing more and more of the tasks that we used to perform as humans.
All right, Margarita, I'm going to hand it over to you.
I'm delighted to be here representing and sharing with my colleagues in the State Humanities Councils this encounter with my dear good friend Jamie Merisotis, who is, as always, full of interesting ideas and challenging proposals. We've been friends for over 2 decades, and we came together joined by a shared interest in public policy, a commitment to higher education, and a deep, deep belief that access to be real, to be authentic, must be access to excellence. And that has been the cause to which Jamie has dedicated most of his professional life. I also share with Jamie a fascination with the power of language to convey, propose diverse meanings to valuable concepts. And I've seen him again and again paraphrase a concept that all of a sudden shines with possibility. I remember particularly when we were all struggling with the concept of non-traditional students and all the negative charge that that term had, you came up with the phrase the students of the 21st century, which absolutely altered that negative cast of the non-traditional students. And then you came out with an analysis called Educating the Emerging Majority. And I was so excited to see that turn of phrase turn around the discussion. And I think this is what you're doing now. You've done it again, Jamie. When you say human work is the work that only humans can do, that all of a sudden presents us with the possibility, extraordinary possibilities, as well as extraordinary challenges. Now, those of in the humanities, and this audience is definitely bent in that direction, would immediately say to you that it is the humanities, the humanistic disciplines, the ones that teach ethics, the ones that cultivate empathy, the ones that make us aware of ambiguity and allow us to analyze all the elements that you enumerated in your presentation. So my first question, my first loaded question is, would you agree that the humanities are the disciplines that would make sense out of human work?
Margarita, it is so wonderful to see you, to be with you in this important event and have a chance to talk about these issues. As you and I have done, as you said, my goodness, for more than 2 decades, it's pretty extraordinary to realize how long we've been engaged in these conversations. And it's worth noting to our colleagues that Margarita and I don't always agree. We often agree, but we don't always agree, which is an important part of where I want to start with the answer to your question, which is that, yeah, of course, I mean, I could simply answer your question and say, yes, of course, the humanities are an important part of illuminating human work. That said, I think all disciplines are connected to human work, but I do want to talk specifically about your question. You know, the way to think about this, I think, is that, and the reason that I got into this, if you'll permit me a moment to talk about my own backstory, is that I spent my life at this intersection of learning and work, trying to make it the learning part more accessible, to help it serve more people and to serve people better. And over the course of my career in working in higher education and public policy and philanthropy, people increasingly were asking me this question, and this question that got harder and harder to answer as time went by. And the question was, Jamie, what is education really ultimately for? And, you know, at the end of the day, I realized that we needed to do a better job in answering these questions as educators, and in the case of the members of the council, the people who are leading in the humanities. Because I think that as technology advances, we have to assume that any task that's repetitive and predictable, and I mean both mental tasks and physical ones, are going to be performed by machines. So, you know, when I say human work is the work that only humans can do, it means that we have to be actively engaged and responding to our environment. It's dynamic, it's not repetitive, it's much more difficult to automate. And, you know, I talk in the book about the fact that AI and technology, I'm pro AI, I'm pro technology. I think it gives us great capacities as human beings. They have this capacity for speed and repetition, but the harder it is to discern pattern and nuance and subtlety, the more likely it is that you're going to need a human to do it. And of course, the most unpredictable environments are those that are created by other humans, which is why so much of this human work involves interacting with people. Well, that human work is very much connected to the humanities, right? It's rooted in our intelligence, our drive, our values, very important part of what the humanities are about. You know, when we think about the core elements of the humanities, whether it be, you know, language or culture, or, you know, the arts, ethics, you know, all of the things that undergird what the humanities are all about, it's essential that we invest in and think about how we expand opportunities in the humanities in order to prepare people for human work. And from my vantage point, I think, you know, I've gotten this question many times over the course of the last several months since I've been on this wholly virtual book tour. You know, people have asked me this question. So does this mean that, you know, at the end of the day, we are going to be delivering learning in a fundamentally different way? And the answer is yes, of course. So we're going to be incorporating elements of what we did in the past in things like the liberal arts, but we're going to need to do so in deeper and more meaningful ways. And the humanities are a critical part of that.
You certainly make the point a number of times in your book that the traditional methods of education and the traditional conception of the disciplines and so forth is no longer sufficient, if it ever was. What do you think is needed? How do we transform or at least modify or adapt to the changing times in
Yeah, it's
education?
an important question and a complex question. My vantage point, my entry point into this was to try to contrast machine learning, or what they call in artificial intelligence, deep learning, and how we learn as humans. And there's really three dimensions of the way humans learn, which is I call wide learning in contrast to deep learning. One is that we have to learn over the course of a long period of time. So that's one of the key dimensions of wide learning. It's time. So it has to take place in a wide time context over the course of people's entire lifetimes, I think is really essential to human work. And, I think this is a virtuous cycle that has to be repeated many times over a person's life cycle, not simply once early in life. And it's one of the points I make in the video, is that we have this deeply ingrained idea that as humans, as people who sort of go through this entire life cycle, that the early part of your life is the optimal time for learning, and the rest of your life is the optimal time for earning. Well, clearly you need to learn early in life, but we now recognize that learning and earning part will continue to take place simultaneously throughout the rest of your adult life, and that you will need to do so. Not simply because you've lost your job, not simply because you want to improve yourself as an individual, but because it's necessary, because the world is changing. And this idea of thinking about learning as something that does not have that time limited dimension that we've thought of historically is really important. The second is something that, you and I have spent much of our time talking about and violently agreeing on, which is that, the learning has to reflect the wide nature of the people doing the learning. So human work has to serve a wide range of people, diverse in terms of their race, their ethnicity, their gender, their immigration status, a host of other factors. So the point is that I think the human workers and the learners, who are human workers, has to represent the totality of society. The reason for that is that we all need to share in the benefits of the human work of others, and the only way to do that is to make sure that everyone has the ability, the capacity, the accessibility to learn. And if we don't provide those opportunities, it's not just that those individuals are penalized, that those individuals suffer, it's that all of us suffer as a human society. And, the third dimension is the content of the learning, which is, sort of the point here about a discussion of the humanities, because, what people have to learn to be successful in the human work ecosystem represents that wide array of human traits and capabilities that makes us human. So, so here I'm talking about that sort of full breadth of our human traits and capabilities, whether it be our compassion and empathy, our ability to be ethical, our ability to collaborate, to analytically reason, to work in teams, all those things. So, the content that we need to focus on is the skills that human work requires, which is why the humanities are so important. And, it's worth underscoring here that one of the key elements about our efforts as humans, as workers, is that we do need to earn money. There's no doubt about that, right? It's an important part of working. But we have a deep desire as humans for meaning as a part of our work. And one data point, if I can, because I'm actually a social scientist, so I'll bring some data to the equation here, is that even for the lowest wage workers, even the people in the bottom quintile of earnings, they say they are willing to give up money for meaning. In other words, what they want out of work, again, people want to earn money. They want to earn more money. It's an important part of human, our humanness, that we want to do better and be able to do more things as a result of our economic capacity. But people, even at the bottom income, are willing to give up money for meaning because they want to make a difference. They want to serve others. And so, human work is ultimately, at the end of the day, about, earning and learning and serving others, because people want dignity. They want meaning. They want that purpose. To me, that sense of social mobility and personal satisfaction and all those things that come with having that sense of self-worth, I think are a very important part of how we think about developing human workers and continuing to develop them through education systems, and why I think we need to focus more on that element of human work going forward.
As we know all too well, in the cuts and adjustments that universities and colleges are making in view of current circumstances, one of the first departments or the first disciplines to go are the humanities. Putting that aside for a moment, but keeping in mind, what do you have way humanities are taught today in higher education? Because it doesn't, I mean, I recognize everything you're saying. And those are the results and those are the consequences of a broad and strong humanistic education. But I think you and I both recognize that that's not necessarily how the humanities are taught.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So I'm going to allow you to criticize the humanities for a moment.
No, I think I want to sort of make maybe a broader point. First of all, I'm not an expert in how the humanities are taught on campus, so let's just acknowledge that. But I want to zero in on something really important that I think is a part of what I'm now wrestling with as the president of Lumina Foundation. Lumina has been focused on trying to dramatically increase post-secondary educational attainment. We've made tremendous progress, by the way, as a country. We've gone from 38% in 2008 to 52% last year. Tremendous progress, 12 million more Americans than when we started. And yet, this question that I started with, which is what is education for, continues to gnaw at us. And part of what we are wrestling with is the last year is a microcosm of what we should be thinking about when we think about how humanities should be taught and what the role of higher education is. Because higher education is ultimately about building a more pluralistic, a flourishing society overall, but it's also about combating existential threats, right? We've got to recognize that climate change is an existential threat, that racial injustice is an existential threat, and authoritarianism, which I mentioned in the video, is an existential threat. And here I think the humanities play a very, very important role, because one of the things that we've seen, particularly in the last few years, in the US as well as in many other parts of the world, is that we've seen an increasing, I guess I would call it, attractiveness of authoritarianism. Why is that? Well, authoritarianism prefers conformity, right? What authoritarians want is they want to stoke fear. They want to stoke fear of change, fear of advantage, fear of the other. And to me, that's a serious threat to the diversity of ideas and beliefs that make us participants in a democratic society. It's a threat literally to the way we interact as humans. So when authoritarianism spikes, we often see that it's when people lose opportunity or because they never had it. So, so we've seen this in full bloom in COVID, and then the consequences of COVID around racial injustice, et cetera. So we've got to think about how we can do a better job in the humanities of literally better preparing people to be active citizens. And here, I'm not talking about civic education. Civic education is a good thing. I think it's very important to teach people about how government works, about the fundamentals of participating in our democracy. That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is giving people the ability to think critically, to understand how to sort truth from untruth, and how to actually be able to use historical examples, cultural examples, examples that come from all of the array of things that make up the important part of what the humanities are about, in addressing these untruths, in addressing these authoritarian tendencies that we've seen rising in society. So, again, back to my sort of bully pulpit here, we've got to cultivate all of those critical thinking and ethical decision-making and collaboration and all of those other democracy-enhancing traits and capabilities in a lot more people. And the humanities will be an important avenue for doing that. Because at the end of the day, this idea that I mentioned, active citizenship, of engaging people in the free expression of ideas, of combating threats to our shared desire for freedom and opportunity, these are the ways that we could make this human work ecosystem actually flourish, and therefore all of us flourish as a part of it.
Well, I hope we get a chance also in the Q&A for you to hear about some of the initiatives that the State Humanities Councils have been pursuing, precisely to bring about the discussion of topics that are, current, urgent, problematic in our current society, and that can be illuminated by the humanities or by the kind of analysis and reflection. So I do hope in my council, for instance, we have looked very carefully at the dialogues between science and the humanities. The most obvious, of course, having to do with medicine and bioethics, but also topics, as you mentioned earlier, about climate control, climate change, and needless to say, the implications of the elections and of current events, international events throughout the world, are also an obvious topic for discussion. So in that respect, how do you visualize this? Is there something that you visualize that the State Humanities Councils could do to help develop this new pedagogy? Because yes, those are the insights and those are the subject matters of the humanities, but they are not necessarily developed or presented in order to encourage the kind of self-awareness or the kind of reflection that you are endorsing. And I know many of my colleagues will want to follow up. So if you had 56 state humanities councils ready, if not to do your bidding, because they wouldn't be humanities if they were allowed themselves to be led by authoritarians, but certainly to listen and to engage. What would you ask us to do on behalf of what you want to advance?
So let me try to address your question in maybe two big buckets here, Margarita. The first is, I think you've got to engage in some introspection across the humanities about the ways in which the humanities are preparing people for this new world of human work. And of course, I've been part of the ongoing conversations about, what are we preparing people for? As I said, what is education for, et cetera. Let's all agree that we are preparing people for a lifetime of opportunity, as I say throughout the book, for earning, for learning, and for serving others as part of this virtuous cycle. So that means that one part of what the humanities as a discipline has to think about is how should we adapt what we're doing to meet these demands of this new world of human work. An important part of that introspection, in my opinion, is how the humanities are actually really, grappling with the racial, the ethnic, and the other inequities that have plagued our society for too long. Again, I view a racial injustice in the same way that I view climate change and authoritarianism, which is that I see it as an existential threat to us, to humanity, to our well-being, to our shared prosperity. And I think that will be a very important part of that introspection. And the other thing I think you need to do as part of that introspection is think about how, as various fields and disciplines, we are bringing people off the sidelines who too often have been left out. I think that's really important. And here I'm talking about getting more people to understand that the humanities are not the so-called soft skills. These are the durable skills. These are the things that matter long term, because in the humanities, you develop that critical thinking and that problem solving and that ability to communicate deeply and that ability to appreciate different cultures and perspectives and viewpoints. All of those things I think are really important. So how do we do that? How do we get more people who have not expressed an interest in higher education to come off the sidelines and come in and see the humanities as an important part of what we do? And then the second is, how do we get the people who do want to come into higher education, come to our part of the, our neck of the woods, and not to go to some of these other fields? Again, I'm of course in favor of increasing all forms of post high school learning, and I believe that we need many more scientists and what have you. But I think it's really important for us to not let this moment elude us. Don't let this moment of the fact that we're now emerging from this pandemic, hopefully, in a way that I think the human traits and capabilities are going to be increasingly accented in what people need, what they desire in terms of their work. So that's one bucket, is the introspection. The other bucket is the question is to think about who are your allies in this process. And obviously, I know you're going to say, well, philanthropy, you need philanthropy. Yeah, got that. I understand that part. Philanthropy's got a tiny bit of money in order to be able to influence, what you need to do. But to me, ultimately, you've got to think about what are the ways in which you change the narrative, whether it's the governmental narrative. I mean, Margarita, you were a great college president, one of the most effective ones I've ever worked with, and you were a great government official. And you understand how government works on the inside. Thinking about how we get to the government policymakers is going to be really important. Not let them proceed with these false assumptions about the humanities and what the humanities are all about is going to be really important. And then, the other thing that it sort of sounds like a crazy talk, but I think is really important, which is how do we get to the business sector? How do we get to the finance sector? How do we get to private capital? Because private capital ultimately will invest in the things that they think will help increase the money that those private capital markets are going to make for their institutional investors, for their individual investors, et cetera. And thinking about how the humanities can actually address, what people are getting out of our education system that actually contributes to increasing capital is really important. And I'll give you one small example from research that you and I have probably seen, which is that one of the things that we know about the financial services sector is that there is a seemingly disproportionate number of people in financial services who come out of the humanities. Why is that? Because so much of what financial services is about is ultimately human interaction, right? It's about customer service. It's about being able to actually develop these relationships with people who are going to invest their money, who are going to do something with their money, et cetera. So let's figure out how we get to them and say, no, this is not your moment to say we need more people to go to B school. We need more people in the humanities. The machines are going to do a lot of the accounting tasks. If there's a field I keep telling people don't go into, it's accounting, because the machines really are going to eat those jobs and truck drivers. But, I'll tell you, the financial services industry is going to continue to grow and evolve, and it's going to need more people from the humanities because the human part of financial services is going to grow in importance as the technology is able to perform the tasks that humans used to do. So, I would think very seriously about how you engage business and particularly private capital in this work.
Well, first of all, my heart is singing with joy to hear you speak so enthusiastically and so creatively about what we need to do. So you have made my day, my week, my year. Thank you. And then I have a confession to make. As I read your book about the multiple options and possibilities and so forth, I formed, developed, trained in the humanities. I started encountering all kinds of prejudices within me to, credentials, the credentials, or accounting.
Right.
And we need to do see the of the humanities. We say that this is, this is the best thing, and I certainly believe that. But we are sometimes stingy with our treasure,
Yeah.
or we want it to be ours in the terms and conditions that we learn them.
Right.
And I don't need to tell you about restructuring curriculum and what that can imply and what that can mean.
There are smarter people in the world than me to figure out how to do that part, Margarita.
But I think you're giving us the right shots, the right injections. And I'd like you to elaborate a bit further in that very interesting trilogy that you have developed, the learning, earning, serving. Because as you explained, we typically used to think of it as a sequential trilogy. So first you learn, then you earn, and then eventually at some point you serve. And what the point you're making is, no, this is all happening simultaneously, and it must happen concurrently, and it must happen throughout your life. But how then? So we are talking about redefining our systems of education and of higher education and of continuing education. That's not an easy task.
No,
Would
no,
you care to elaborate?
it's not. And I think it's a very important part of. I saw one of the questions pop up already in the Q&A about how the humanities can play I guess a bigger role in this conversation about education and workforce training. Yeah, you've got to sort of figure out how to get beyond your confines, your structures, your guardrails. And to the point of the question, participate in those conversations. It's really important. Society needs you right now, right? And so, how do you do that? Well, part of the ways in which you can do that is that you can effectively engage with the people who are actually making the spending decisions. So, I've been talking in the last couple of months now about the fact that, and it doesn't matter what your politics are now, right? So we're going to sort of put politics aside. The fact is, we are going to look back on 2021 and recognize it as a 100-year flood of federal money when it comes into the space of education and training. We've already seen that with the Recovery Act, and we are likely to see that in some of these bills that are coming up now with what President Biden framed as the family plan and the jobs plan. So what we are looking at is a substantial infusion of new capital way beyond what we saw after the 2008-2010 recession. You were one of the people that was working among many on this idea of the race to the top. Race to the Top, remember, was a $5 billion program. In the Recovery Act, we had more than $30 billion alone going to higher education in one fell swoop as part of that work, and more than $100 billion in K-12. So we are talking about substantial amounts of money, and I think there's more to come. So don't sit on the sidelines. You're not going to participate on how much money, but you can participate in the question about how those resources get allocated. And I'm telling you, that money is going to flow to states, it's going to flow to institutions of higher education, and making sure that those resources are allocated for purposes that are going to prepare people for human work by giving them greater access and opportunity to study in the humanities and to link that to what their future education and or what their future job opportunities are, making that clearer connection to education and training to the point of the question, I think will be really important. And then the other thing that I think, as a sort of practical matter for the humanities is that, as you write the learning outcomes in each of these fields, you've got to be clear about what you're preparing people for. If you haven't done that really clearly, I think it will be important to do that. What are those tasks that you will be able to do as a result of having a degree, a credential in whatever the major of the field is that you're studying in. I think that will be very important.
Well, you just laid out my work plan for the next 5 years, Jamie. I thought I was a busy person. Okay. Any final thoughts before we go to Q&A?
No. Sorry, I already stole one of the Q&A questions. Sorry, but I saw it pop up when we were talking, and I was like, oh, that's a good question.
No problem. No problem at
all.
all. Thank you so much. It's already been such a rich conversation. We have a second question here. There are a lot of reports coming out about labor shortages due to people quitting their low wage or low engaging jobs to search for something better. Do you believe this will spur employers to better think about the roles of their employees? And do you think this quote unquote worker revolution will last past the pandemic?
Oh, this is a fantastic question. And it's a really hard question, which is why it's fantastic. So let me give you my cut on this issue of the labor shortage. First of all, I think the labor shortage is real, and I think it existed before the pandemic. And again, I think the trend has been accelerated as a result of the pandemic. Part of it had to do with the fact that we hadn't invested enough in thinking about what these human tasks are that we need people to perform in a world where the technology is going to perform more and more of those tasks. Well, COVID has clearly accelerated that, and so we need to be thinking about the ways in which employers are actually engaging their current workers and their prospective workers in this process. And here I think that there's two things that we should be thinking about. One is, as industries change and as jobs change, we should be thinking about this concept. And I don't think I invented the term, but I use it a lot now. Called career adjacency. So the idea is, you're working in one field. There's likely to be a change in that field because of technology. And the question is, what are you going to do next? Well, before COVID, my example I use all the time is, before COVID, we all said, oh my goodness, self-driving vehicles are going to come along. All the truck drivers are going to be out of jobs 10 years from now. So we need to make them coders. And my response to that is, forget about it. You are not going to get someone who has driven a truck to suddenly go into an entirely different field. So what do you have to think about? You have to think about the adjacency. What can truck drivers do? Truck drivers can become logistics experts. Logisticians understand how goods and services move, but that requires human skills, right? It requires, a sort of understanding of how people interact with each other. It does require technical skills, so it does require some of those computer skills in order to be able to do that, but it requires this sort of synthesis of experiences and ideas that's really important. So thinking about, how we seize this moment of the so-called labor shortages to actually get people into these career adjacent opportunities will be really important. Let's not try to fit square pegs into round holes here. Let's think about what those adjacent opportunities are.
Yeah. I keep losing sleep over who are the pilots going to be.
Right.
I just tried to fly somewhere and they just canceled my flight out of nowhere.
Right.
And now have given me a full refund, which I'm like, there's something fishy. This is from American,
Right.
but I wonder about that. But anyway,
you're
half joking, half not.
No, you're absolutely right.
Another question here, can you say more about how people are measuring the value of meaning? So I love this idea of people, prioritizing meaning and a cause, and, all about that, also all about paying the living wage. But
yeah, so it's hard. The research that's been done on this, I actually looked at, was from Gallup, which Gallup had a very specific set of ideas around what meaning meant. Part of what Gallup says meaning is that people enjoy their work. That they actually say that they are happy in their work. They say that having stable and predictable pay is really important, but they say in particular having a sense of purpose in the work is really important. So what does that sense of purpose mean? Well, what it means is that you're valued and respected in the workplace. Your ideas are taken into account, that you are interacting with people who appreciate what you're doing and who are going to encourage you to do more and different things. And so, those kind of things I think are really important as we think about how we are going to, better measure this value of meaning over time, because I think we've got to understand, how it exists in the minds of the people who are seeking, who are craving that greater meaning and purpose. Back to the labor shortage question for a second, because it's clearly connected. I think part of the reason why we have seen new kinds of labor shortages emerge here is that people went through this, once in a lifetime experience of a global pandemic, and it's given people a sense of introspection about, what am I doing? What is my reason for being here? I'm still alive. I beat the disease. And, what does that mean? How do I actually think about my life going forward? You've probably seen some of the data saying that there's an increasing proportion of people who are, I'm going to cough when I say this, my age, which is, the people over 50 who are now retiring earlier than they thought they would, because they realize they want that meaning and purpose in their life that's different. It doesn't mean they don't want to work. It means that they want to retire from what they're doing now and maybe find some other things to do. So I'm not talking about the people that just want to go golf. I'm talking about the people who decide that they want, in the second half of their life, to contribute in a different way. And some of that may have to do with things where they actually continue to earn money, but they're looking for more meaningful work opportunities. And when you look at that, combined with the fact that many of the jobs that we lost in the pandemic were jobs that were in industries where the automation and the AI is going to take over more of their tasks, hospitality, for example, manufacturing, et cetera. I think it's going to be imperative for us to think very seriously about how we as employers, putting myself in this bucket now, how we as employers actually think about providing meaning in the work that our employees
Right.
are performing.
And I was just going to follow up with that to say that meaning might look different generationally even. I also love that you say in the second half of life, because I'm there too, not the last half, let's say.
Right.
But I wanted to connect this back. We have another question about the truck drivers, but I want to interject with a question of this idea of meaning, but also related, but a little bit different, is this idea of bringing, an equity lens to the workplace in terms of people bringing their whole selves to work. And I think, particularly during COVID, I mean, I'm sure many people didn't so much want their whole selves in the back. It's inviting people into your home on the Zoom camera, right? So there's a lot more sort of vulnerability there. And this whole idea of the etiquette around people turning off their cameras or not.
Right.
But this idea of showing up as you are, working when you would like to. Sorry, I'm in DC with helicopters everywhere. And working the days and the nights or the mornings or whatever around childcare, elder care, or whatever. So I'm thinking not only about co-creating meaning in the work or having a cause, but also what it means to be at work.
Yeah. By the way, Lumina Foundation is trying to figure that out right now. I'm literally at my office now. We're doing a 1-month test. We are not back to the office yet, but we're doing a 1-month test with a fraction of our employees to figure out sort of what does it mean to now have some people in the office. We were obviously a wholly remote organization for 1.5 years now. And what will it mean to be a hybrid working organization going forward? And part of what we are going to have to do is to think about what is the value of the in-person interaction. Why, to put the question bluntly, why should I come back to the office if I'm the worker? And part of my answer is that, you don't have to come back to the office every day. I've already stated that to our team, but you should be here from time to time, because what you are missing is the ability to have that kind of human interaction that's really important in terms of developing trust, compatibility, a sense of shared purpose, all of those things that are really, really important. And again, we do those things really well when it comes to our work in the humanities. So, I think that's really important. See, I've got sirens in the background now too, Phoebe, ironically. At the end of the day, I think that's going to be a really important part of what we're going to need to do, is to think about how, as employers, we are doing that. One practical thing I've been speaking to a lot of employer audiences, as you can imagine, in this book tour. And one of the things that I've said to them is, sit down with your employees and actually develop a plan for the employees' next 5 to 10 years, not just for the benefit of your company, but for the benefit of their well-being as employees. And that plan should not only include, how do you increase your skill level to get the next job in this company or what have you, but also how are you thinking about your role as serving others as part of this job? So, for example, I use this example with a pharmaceutical company. If you're developing a diabetes drug, you should not only be, increasing your scientific knowledge about the issues related to how you address diabetes. You should be spending time in the field with people who have diabetes to further improve your empathy, your understanding of what they're going through, because the drugs that you're developing ultimately have to have an effect on their well-being, or else they're simply, a palliative. They're not really solving the problem. So,
yeah,
but to me, that's going to be really important part of.
Yeah, it's a whole part of what I think about from hearing Brian Stevenson speak and reading his work about being proximate. And as you said, changing the narrative and being uncomfortable and being hopeful at the same time. I mean, but that that being proximate and what that looks like now, I just think a lot about that. We have another question about regarding this career adjacency. What if truck drivers, others, for example, are resistant to changing their careers? I mean, we can understand that, right? Like, what? Now I'm going to go be a coder, you know, am I just being sort of
Yeah.
shuttled to the side here, or
Yeah.
what? You know, so just wondering, from that perspective, what obviously needs support and training, but beyond that, just a resistance to that kind of change.
We've done grants to an organization called Working Nation, and Working Nation is it's an interesting organization. It's actually an organization that's trying to tell the story of the changing nature of work. So it's a storytelling organization. Really impressive people with Emmy Award, Academy Award type portfolios. The person, if you're a sports fan, the person who invented the 30 for 30 on ESPN is a part of the Working Nation team now. It's really quite fascinating. So really effective storytellers. So they've been out interviewing people, massive numbers of people, and they've talked to a lot of individuals who are in these very vulnerable industries. And you can present them with data. You can present them with facts about the likelihood of their job being lost, and you can present them with an understanding of what the new opportunities would be. And many of them say they won't do it. They won't do it. Why? It's not that they're resistant to change in their career. It's that they're resistant to the idea of traditional learning modes. What they don't want to do is go and sit in the classroom and learn in a way that seems foreign to them, particularly as adult learners. So we've got to find a way to meet the learners where they are, to figure out how to get them into these career adjacent opportunities by saying, look, you learned this in this field. We're going to get you to here. It's going to build on what you got, on what you learned in your job as a truck driver the last 20 years, but it's going to take you down this path. And I think presenting them with the career adjacent opportunities and making it easier for them to participate, whether that's hybrid learning opportunities, whether it's bringing it directly into the workplace, whatever it may be, I think will be really important.
Unmute. That sounds great. Still learning on a learning curve for me, right? So we have a long but excellent question from KK Hammond, Cordell Hammond, who is the grants assistant with Humanities New York, our Humanities Council there. Thanks in advance. How can we, as state humanities councils, better engage our diverse publics who may or may not be involved in or actively engaged with these tough questions yet for various reasons, but who for sure these questions will impact? How can we get our audiences thinking about human work in the context of collective well-being, not just the well-being of one group or the other group, but a collective effort from and for all people, as well as the animals and the land, who are no doubt a part of our human condition. Jamie, do you have advice to offer on encouraging the removal of fear of, quote, the other, who is not particularly in our direct community? What does active democratic citizenry look like while responsibly including grassroots, Black, Indigenous, and Native people? Great book, great ideas. Thank you for your thoughts and research. All right, KK Hammond, thank you.
Yeah, fantastic question, and frankly, a very sophisticated question. Look, let me start with this question of what's in it for me as opposed to what's in it for the collective well-being. We've got to do a better job of helping to educate those diverse publics that KK talked about, in understanding that education provides both public and private benefits. We've spent a lot of time trying to convince people to go because they'll make more money, because they will personally benefit, et cetera. But this inflection point of the last couple of years in understanding that racial injustice is not about somebody else, it's about all of us. A pandemic is not about my own health. It's about the health of everyone else. It's why wearing a mask is not just good for you, it's good for other people. All of those things that I think we've been reminded of in this moment in human history that I think are really important to focus on. So, what does active citizenship look like? Again, certainly one level of it is the basic level, the one that I think the civic educators have talked about for a long time, which is engaging people in democratic processes. So it's voting, it's participating in your local community, it's doing all of those things. But I think more broadly, it's about understanding, what your role is in this wider community. And here I would elevate, from the racial justice perspective, elevate the voices of those in the community who are actually people who have been, victims of the system because of racial injustice, and elevate them and help them understand that their experiences are not just about them; they are about our collective well-being and sense. And again, the evidence is pretty clear. Back to Jamie, the social scientist, we know that people who actually have these higher levels of education better appreciate diverse communities, diverse perspectives, diverse ideas. They do a better job of actually contributing to shared well-being. They ultimately want to know more about, language and the arts and history and culture and ethics and all the things that are the core of the humanities. And that makes them more effective participants in our shared well-being. I will say I've gotten this question, a less eloquent version of this question before, and one of the things that people will say to me is, and I apologize for the politics of this, but Ted Cruz is highly educated, but he's not participating in any of the things that you're talking about. And my answer to that candidly is that education is not going to solve for the problem of ill will. But at a larger sense, it is going to address this sense of shared well-being, that we are one nation, one global community, one human race, and that we've got to do a better job of actually using our ability to learn as humans in order to contribute to that shared well-being.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we just have a few minutes left here. I don't know, Margarita, if you have any questions. I just want to thank you, Jamie, for being here today and bringing this dialogue. I hope you will continue this dialogue with us, with the state and jurisdictional humanities councils. Any final words from you, Margarita?
Just to thank my colleagues for joining us, and to thank Jamie for such a boost and such a stimulating session we've had. Looking forward to the next one.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be a part of this, and thank you for the good work that each of the state humanities councils does. I think it's incredibly important work, and I'm grateful for all that you do.
Well, we will continue, and for our Humanities Council audiences on the call, I will say please tune in for our next webinar, which will be in July. I think I want to say July 14th. Obviously, I should have this right in front of me. Using a racial equity lens in hiring and belonging in your workplace. So we're really, really excited about that conversation. That is going to be led by Rachel Gibson from Markham, and who's head of DEI there. And then also we're going to have the executive directors of Maryland Humanities with us as well. So excited for that. So stay tuned. And again, thank you so much, Margarita, for this opportunity. Jamie, for generously spending your time with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Very
really
thought-provoking.
I hope to make it both to Washington, D.C. and to Puerto Rico before long.
Great. Well, welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Be well.
Take care.